Jamal King, a 17-year-old honors student with dreams of becoming a lawyer, had his life shattered when a corrupt officer framed him for a crime he didn't commit. Beaten, humiliated and left to fight a system designed to oppress, Jamal refused to back down. What he did next will leave you speechless. Watch until the end to uncover his incredible journey of resilience and justice. Don't forget to subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know where you're watching from. Jamal King was a 17-year-old high school student with a promise in future. He was known for his excellent grades, involvement in community service and a passion for justice that inspired his dream of becoming a lawyer. Raised by his father, Marcus King, a respected judge, and his supportive mother, Jamal grew up in a household that valued integrity and hard work. His life seemed to be on the perfect trajectory until the day everything changed. It began like any other afternoon. Jamal had just finished a study session at the library and stopped by a nearby bookstore to pick up a legal text he had been saving for. As he stepped out into the street, his mind filled with thoughts of college applications and upcoming exams. A police car pulled up beside him. Inside sat Officer Hank Simmons, a man whose reputation for targeting young black men in the community was well known but often ignored by his superiors. Hank's eyes locked onto Jamal with a look of disdain. Without any preamble, he got out of the car and barked an order. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" Jamal froze, confused but compliant. He had been taught by his parents to remain calm and respectful in situations like this, no matter how unjust they might seem. He raised his hand slightly to show he had nothing to hide. "What's the problem, officer?" Jamal asked, his voice steady despite the tension building in his chest. "You match the description of someone we're looking for," Hank replied with a sneer. Before Jamal could respond, Hank grabbed him by the arm and shoved him against the wall of the bookstore. The roughness of the officer's grip sent a jolt of pain through Jamal's shoulder, but he remained silent, knowing any protest could escalate the situation. As Hank began to search Jamal's backpack, passers-by stopped to watch. Whispers spread through the small crowd, but no one stepped forward to intervene. The humiliation Jamal felt was compounded by the officer's crude remarks. "What do we have here? A young punk out causing trouble? Let's see what you're hiding." Jamal's bag was empty except for a notebook, a pen, and the book he had just purchased, but Hank wasn't satisfied. He reached into his own pocket and with a quick motion he pulled out a small plastic bag containing what appeared to be drugs. Jamal's eyes widened in disbelief as the officer slipped it into the side pocket of his bag. "What is that?" "That's not mine," Jamal protested, panic creeping into his voice. Hank smirked. "Sure it's not, that's what they all say." The officer yanked Jamal's arms behind his back and slapped handcuffs on him with unnecessary force. "You're under arrest for possession of illegal substances," he declared loudly, ensuring everyone in the vicinity could hear. The murmurs among the onlookers grew louder, but still no one intervened. Jamal's heart pounded as he tried to process what was happening. He wanted to scream, to beg someone to believe him, but the words caught in his throat. Hank dragged Jamal to the police car. Ignoring his pleas of innocence, the humiliation deepened as people pulled out their phones to record the scene. Jamal knew his life was being reduced to a viral moment, a snippet of injustice that might never see true resolution. The ride to the police station was a blur. Jamal sat in the back seat, his wrists aching from the tight cuffs, his mind racing with fear and confusion. He thought about his parents, about how devastated they would be when they found out. He thought about his future, about how one false accusation could destroy everything he had worked for. At the station things only got worse. Hank paraded Jamal through the precinct, loudly announcing his arrest to anyone who would listen. "Caught this one red-handed," he said with a smirk. The other officers laughed and made snide comments as Jamal was pushed into a holding cell. The cold metal bars and the stench of the cell block were a stark contrast to the life all had known. He felt like he was in a nightmare, one he couldn't wake up from. Meanwhile, Marcus King was at home when he received the call. The news hit him like a punch to the gut. His son, his bright ambitious son, had been arrested for drug possession. Marcus knew immediately that something was wrong. Jamal had never so much as skipped a class, let alone engaged in illegal activity. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Marcus grabbed his coat and headed for the station. Jamal sat on the cold bench in his cell, his mind replaying the events over and over. He couldn't understand why this was happening to him. Tears of frustration and fear welled up in his eyes, but he refused to let them fall. He thought about his parents, about how hard they had worked to give him a good life. He couldn't let this injustice break him. The sound of footsteps brought him back to the present. An officer approached the cell and unlocked it. "You've got a visitor," he said gruffly. Jamal's heart leapt as he stood up, hoping it was his father, and when he saw Marcus standing there, his expression a mix of anger and determination, Jamal felt a surge of hope, but he also knew this was only the beginning of a battle for his innocence and his future. Jamal sat quietly in the small interrogation room, his wrists still sore from the handcuffs. The sterile white walls and flickering fluorescent lights made the space feel cold and unwelcoming. Across the table sat Officer Hank Simmons, smirking confidently as he shuffled through paperwork. Jamal's stomach churned as he watched the officer's blatant disregard for truth and justice. He couldn't believe that his life had been turned upside down in a matter of hours. Hank leaned back in his chair, his voice dripping with mockery. "So you've never been in trouble before, huh? A clean record? Well, not anymore," he chuckled, tapping his pen against the table. "Guess you're not as innocent as everyone thinks." Jamal clenched his fists under the table, struggling to maintain his composure. He wanted to shout, to demand answers, but he knew it would only make things worse. His parents had always taught him to stay calm and level-headed even in the face of adversity, yet the anger simmering inside him was becoming harder to contain. Before Jamal could respond, the door to the room swung open and another officer stepped in. He whispered something to Hank, who nodded and stood up. "Stay put," Hank ordered, his tone sharp and commanding. As the two officers left the room, Jamal was left alone, his thoughts racing. Meanwhile, in the main precinct area, Marcus King was speaking with the desk sergeant. His voice was calm but firm as he demanded to see his son. The sergeant, clearly uncomfortable under the weight of Marcus's authority, hesitated before relenting. "Give me a moment, just Judge King, I'll see what I can do." Marcus's reputation as a fair but unyielding judge preceded him. He had spent years fighting for justice, ensuring that everyone, regardless of their background, was treated with dignity and respect. Now he found himself on the other side of the system he had dedicated his life to improving, fighting for the very principles he upheld. As Marcus waited, he noticed a group of officers gathered nearby, their laughter grating against his nerves. Among them was Hank Simmons, who seemed entirely unbothered by the situation. Marcus's sharp gaze locked on to Hank, and for a moment the officer faltered under the judge's intense scrutiny. Jamal's wait in the interrogation room felt like an eternity. The silence was oppressive and the uncertainty weighed at him. Finally the door opened again and an officer escorted him out, leading him down a dimly lit hallway. At the end of the hall, Jamal saw his father standing tall, his expression a mixture of relief and resolve. "Dad," Jamal said, his voice trembling with a mix of emotions. Marcus stepped forward, placing a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked, his tone gentle but concerned. Jamal nodded, though the pain and humiliation of the day were evident in his eyes. Marcus turned to the officer. "I want to speak with whoever is in charge here," he demanded. The officer hesitated, clearly reluctant to comply, but Marcus's authoritative presence left little room for argument. In a nearby office, Marcus confronted the precinct captain, laying out his case with precision and determination. "My son is innocent," he stated firmly. "I demand a thorough investigation into this matter, starting with the actions of Officer Simmons." The captain shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Judge King, I assure you we take these allegations Seriously, however, your son was found in possession of. Don't insult my intelligence. Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through the captain's excuses. I've reviewed the preliminary evidence and it's clear that this is a setup. If you refuse to act, I will take this to the highest level. The captain, recognizing the gravity of the situation, reluctantly agreed to review the evidence. Marcus left the office feeling a small sense of satisfaction, but he knew this was just the beginning of a long fight back in the holding cell. Jamal sat quietly, his thoughts swirling. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, but he drew strength from his father's unwavering support. He refused to let this injustice define him. As the hours dragged on, he resolved to fight back, not just for himself but for everyone who had ever been wrongfully targeted by those in power. Marcus King spent the next few days immersed in his investigation, determined to clear his son's name. He combed through every piece of evidence, contacted every possible lead, and utilized his network of trusted colleagues to uncover the truth. The pressure mounted as media outlets began reporting on Jamal's arrest, painting him in a negative light based on the fabricated charges. Marcus knew time was of the essence. Every moment Jamal spent labeled as a criminal was another moment his future slipped further away. Marcus' breakthrough came when he obtained access to surveillance footage from a camera outside the bookstore where Jamal had been stopped. He watched intently as the video played, his jaw tightening when the moment of truth unfolded before his eyes. The footage clearly showed Officer Hank Simmons pulling a small bag of drugs from his own pocket and slipping it into Jamal's backpack. The clarity of the evidence left no doubt Jamal had been framed. The rage Marcus felt was tempered by the relief of finding proof of his son's innocence. He immediately contacted his legal team and prepared to confront the police department. Marcus also knew this revelation had the potential to spark significant backlash. Hank Simmons wasn't just a rogue cop, he was a symptom of a larger systemic problem. Marcus saw an opportunity not only to exonerate Jamal but also to challenge the culture of corruption and bias within the department. At the precinct, Marcus demanded a meeting with the precinct captain. The captain, visibly uneasy, greeted Marcus with forced politeness. Judge King, what can I do for you today? He asked, though the tension in his voice was evident. Marcus placed a USB drive on the captain's desk. I want you to watch this, he said, his tone firm but measured. The captain hesitated before plugging the drive into his computer. As the footage played, his expression shifted from disbelief to alarm. When the video ended, the room was filled with a heavy silence. This is damning, the captain finally admitted, leaning back in his chair. I'll admit this doesn't look good for Simmons. Doesn't look good, Marcus retorted, his voice rising. It's more than not looking good, it's irrefutable proof that your officer framed my son, assaulted him and dragged his name through the mud. I expect quick activity. The commander gestured hesitantly. I'll open an inside examination. Simmons will be put on leave while we survey this. That is not enough, Marcus said forcefully. I need his identification and I need criminal accusations recorded. Anything less is a disappointment of equity. The showdown left the commander noticeably shaken. Marcus' requests couldn't be overlooked, not when the proof was so accursing and people in general was starting to take notice. Fresh insight about the video spread quickly, lighting a firestorm of shock. Local area pioneers and activists coordinated fights outside the region, requesting responsibility for Hank Simmons as well as for the more extensive issues of racial predisposition and police unfortunate behavior. Jamal, actually faltering from his experience, watched the fights on the news from the well-being of his home. His delivery had been a clashing triumph. In spite of the fact that he was at this point not in a correctional facility, the close-to-home scars of his experience ran profound. He attempted to accommodate his annoyance and agony with the mind-boggling help pouring in from companions, neighbors and even outsiders who put stock in his honesty. As the fights became stronger, Marcus kept on pushing forward. He worked with a group of lawyers to guarantee the charges against Jamal were officially dropped and that Simmons confronted. The brimming with the law. The battle wasn't simple. Simmons' partners inside the division attempted to protect him, excusing the video as taken inappropriately and scrutinizing its realness, yet Marcus was constant. He realized the fact of the matter was his ally in the court. The video turned into the focal point of the case. Marcus stood firm as the indictment destroyed Simmons' protection, uncovering his untruths and offense. The proof was obvious and the jury burned through no time conveying their decision. Simmons was viewed as at fault for misrepresenting proof and manhandling his power. His conviction sent shockwaves through the local area and denoted a defining moment in the battle against fundamental bigotry inside the neighborhood police force. Notwithstanding the triumph, the fight had negatively affected Jamal and his loved ones. Marcus realized this was just the start. While his child's name had been gotten the way of life free from inclination, foul play that had prompted his capture actually posed a potential threat. Jamal, propelled by his father's assurance and the help of the local area, set out to utilize his experience to advocate for change. As he remained in the horde of nonconformists holding a sign that read "Equity for All," he understood that his battle was a long way from being done. Jamal's opportunity included some significant downfalls he had never expected, albeit the charges against him had been dropped and official Hank Simmons had been sentenced. The result for the trial left him powerless in ways he had never envisioned. The media free for all encompassing the case made him a nearby non-entity for treachery. However, it likewise painted an objective on his back. As the residue settled, new dangers started to arise and Jamal understood that his battle was a long way from being done. The main difficult situations came as mysterious calls. At first they were unclear, quiet calls or suppressed voices mumbling curses before suddenly hanging up, yet soon they swelled into unequivocal dangers. You believe you're protected, will make sure you lament how you treated Simmons, one voice growled late one night. Jamal's stomach contorted with dread. However, he would not allow the dangers to control him. His guardians encouraged him to remain inside and keep away from superfluous dangers, yet Jamal, not entirely settled to recover his life, demanded proceeding with his day-to-day schedules. One evening, as Jamal headed back home from a local gathering, he took note a police cruiser gradually following him. The vehicle's presence felt suffocating, and when it in the end halted next to him, two officials ventured out. One of them was Garrett Thompson, a dear companion of Hank Simmons and a vocal ally of his activities during the preliminary. The other official, a more youthful man with a numb articulation, remained back as Garrett drew nearer. Jamal, well, Garrett said, his voice trickling with disdain, on the off chance that it isn't the brilliant kid himself partaking in your opportunity, are you? Jamal attempted to continue to walk, yet Garrett stepped before him, impeding his way. What's the rush? We simply need to talk. Garrett jeered, his tone taunting. Jamal felt his heart race, yet he constrained himself to keep composed. I don't have anything to tell you, Jamal answered solidly. He attempted to step around the official, however Garrett snatched his arm, his grasp swelling. You try not to move, to leave, Garrett murmured. Not after what you did. Jamal yanked his arm free, yet the unexpected development appeared to incite Garrett further. Before Jamal could respond, Garrett pushed him against the side of the cruiser, sticking him there with pointless power. The more youthful official moved awkwardly, yet took no action to mediate. You believe you're unapproachable. Presently Garrett snarled, you want to demolish a decent cop's life and simply walk away. Jamal flinched as Gar squeezed more earnestly against him, his face inches away. I didn't destroy anybody's life, Jamal shot back, his voice consistent notwithstanding the apprehension flowing through him. He did that to himself. Garrett's demeanor obscured. Furthermore, briefly Jamal figured the official could strike him. Rather, Garrett allow him to go with a push, making Jamal stagger. Watch yourself, kid, Garrett said briskly. This isn't over. Shaken, however resolved, Jamal advanced, home and promptly educated his dad concerning the experience. Marcus' face solidified with outrage as he listened. "This is provocation," he said, his voice loaded up with resolve. "I'll ensure Garrett Thompson faces ramifications for this." Yet the provocation didn't stop. By the following couple of weeks, Jamal got himself halted and addressed by police on different occasions for reasons unknown. Each experience was bound with daintily hidden antagonism, and Jamal started to perceive the essences of the officials who appeared to be focusing on him plainly. Garrett and others were endeavoring to threaten him into quiet. The tipping point came one evening when Jamal was heading back home from school. As he turned a corner, two men wearing regular clothes got out of a left vehicle and snatched him. Jamal battled, yet the men were more grounded and they hauled him into the vehicle. A blindfold was pulled over his eyes and he felt the virus press of zip ties against his wrists. Frenzy flooded through him as the vehicle hurried away. The men took him to an unwanted structure on the edges of the town where they constrained him to sit on a cruel floor. One of the men eliminated his blindfold, uncovering Garrett Thompson remaining before him. "You simply don't have the foggiest idea when to keep your mouth shut, do you?" Garrett said, pacing gradually. "You believe you're some sort of legend. Currently Jamal's apprehension was supplanted by rebellion. "You can't terrify me," he said, his voice consistent. "The fact of the matter is out and individuals understand what you're doing." Garrett giggled, a savage sound that reverberated through the vacant room. "Reality doesn't matter when individuals like me are in control." He inclined down, his face crawls from Jamal's. "Nevertheless, allowed me to make something understood. On the off chance that you don't quit starting mischief, your family could begin having mishaps." Jamal's blood ran cold at the danger. However, he wouldn't allow Garrett to see his apprehension. Rather, he gazed back at the official with steadfast determination. "Do anything you desire of me," Jamal said. "I won't quit battling." Garrett's grin floundered briefly before he fixed up. "We'll see about that," he expressed, motioning toward different men. They left Jamal restricted in the structure, yet before they left, Garrett turned around. "Look at this as an advance notice. In the future it'll be more awful." Hours after the fact, Jamal figured out how to free himself and advanced back home. His guardians were sickened when he let them know what had occurred, and Marcus quickly reached the specialists to report the kidnapping. However, Jamal realized that Garrett and his partners wouldn't stop. He was not entirely set in stone to hold fast regardless of the expense. Jamal's assurance to retaliate just filled the fire of the people who needed to quietness him. Garrett Thompson and his partners turned out to be progressively forceful, their provocation growing into through and through savagery. The dangers were not generally restricted to Jamal alone. They started focusing on his family. Two unknown notes were left at their entryway loaded up with terrible racial slurs and hidden alerts. Calls came at the entire hours of the night with unfavorable voices on the opposite end promising damage in the event that Jamal didn't become familiar with his place. In spite of his dad's earnest attempts to safeguard him, Jamal felt the heaviness of the tempest overwhelming him. One night, as Jamal was getting back from a young effort occasion, he seen a vehicle following him at a sluggish, purposeful speed. His heartbeat stimulated. However, he attempted to go about like he hadn't seen. The road was shockingly tranquil, the common murmur of night action supplanted by a disrupting quietness. When he turned down a side road to pursue a faster route, the vehicle sped up, removing him. Three men leaped out, and before Jamal could respond, they encompassed him. The head of the bunch, Garrett Thompson, ventured forward, his face curved with hatred. "Didn't I advise you to keep your mouth shut, kid?" he growled before Jamal could answer. Garrett's clenched hand associated with his stomach taking the breeze out of him, he multiplied over, wheezing for air. Yet the men didn't give him a second to recuperate. They pushed him to the ground, kicking and punching him tenaciously. "You believe you're some sort of legend," Garrett murmured, his voice loaded up with toxin. "You're nothing. You're simply another troublemaker who doesn't have any idea when to stop." Jamal's vision obscured as agony flowed through his body. However, he would not shout out, he ground his teeth. Det decided not to give them the fulfillment. The attack appeared to continue everlastingly, each blow an indication of the contempt and bias that filled these men. At long last they ventured back, leaving him bloodied and scarcely cognizant on the cool asphalt as Jamal lay there battling to inhale. Garrett stooped adjacent to him and snatched his jawline, compelling him to look up. "This is only the starting," he said with a chilling sneer. "Next time you will not get off so natural." The men got once more into their vehicle and drove off, abandoning Jamal in the dimness. He assembled the solidarity to take out his telephone and call his dad. At the point when Marcus showed up, his face was a combination of fierceness and pain. He bowed close to his child, delicately helping him to his feet. "We're going to the clinic," Marcus said immovably, his voice shudder with controlled rage. At the emergency clinic, the specialists treated Jamal's wounds, which incorporated a broke rib and extreme swelling. Marcus remained close by, promising to carry Garrett and his accessory to Equity. "This finishes now," Marcus said, his eyes bursting with assurance. The assault on Jamal started a flood of shock locally. Word spread rapidly and individuals united behind the ruler family requesting responsibility. Dissenters assembled outside the police headquarters holding signs that read "Equity for Jamal" and "End Police Defilement." The strain on the division strengthened. However, Garrett and his partners appeared to be distant, safeguarded by a culture of quietness inside the power. Jamal, in spite of his wounds, wouldn't be hushed. He talked at local gatherings, sharing his story and asking others to face unfairness. His grit enlivened numerous, yet it moreover made him a significantly greater objective. The dangers proceeded, and Marcus realized they couldn't take on this still up in the air. To uncover reality, Marcus started working with a group of specialists to assemble proof against Garrett and his organization. It was a risky undertaking, yet Marcus was persistent. He uncovered accursing data about Garrett's set of experiences of wrongdoing and the fundamental defilement that permitted him to work with exemption. Furnished with this proof, Marcus arranged to take the battle to the courts. However, Garrett wasn't finished with Jamal. One night, as Jamal was resting at home, the power unexpectedly went out. Minutes after the fact, the sound of breaking glass reverberated through the house. Marcus raced to Jamal's room, finding him currently on his feet, his face pale, however resolved. Together they stood up to the gatecrashers, concealed men who had broken in, obviously sent as a last cautioning. Marcus didn't hold back. He squeezed a signal for an emergency response he had introduced. After Jamal's snatching setting off a quiet caution, the men faltered, understanding they were in a tough spot, and escaped before the police showed up. The break-in was a defining moment. Marcus realized they expected to act rapidly to guarantee Jamal's security and consider Garrett responsible for the last time. The following days were a haze of arranging and planning. With the proof Marcus had accumulated, they recorded a conventional protest against Garrett, supported by declarations from other people who had endured under his maltreatment of force. The case acquired public consideration, and the heaviness of public investigation started to move the overall influence. Jamal, however battered and tired, found strength in the help of his family and local area. He realized the battle was a long way from over. However, he likewise realized he was in good company as he remained before a horde of allies, his voice consistent in spite of the aggravation. He announced, "We won't be quieted. Together we will make a reality where equity is in excess of a word. It's a reality." Jamal sat at the edge of his medical clinic bed, his body actually throbbing from the assault. The injuries all over, and the wraps around his ribs were steady tokens of the savagery he had persevered, yet his soul remained whole. Every time he shut his eyes, he saw the essences of Garrett Thompson and his accomplice, heard their threatening statements and felt the sting of their blows. Yet in those minutes he likewise saw his dad's undaunted assurance and the steadfast help of his local area. Jamal realized he was unable to let dread direct his life. Marcus Ruler had gone through the beyond a few days working enthusiastically to guarantee that Garrett and his partners would confront equity. The proof he and his group of examiners had assembled was a cursing against Garrett as well as against a few different officials ensnared in an example of defilement and misuse. Public shock had reached a limit, with fights developing. Bigger and stronger media sources from the nation over got the story, and it turned into an image of the more extensive battle against foundational bigotry and police severity. As the day of the court hearing showed up, Jamal set himself up for what was to come. In spite of his father's demand that he remain at home and rest, Jamal would not sit on the sidelines. He realized this was as much his battle as any other person's. Wearing a sharp suit that covered the most obviously terrible of his wounds, he strolled into the town hall with his folks by his side. Seeing the gigantic group assembled external filled him with a blend of nervousness and trust. Signs uncovering messages like equity for M and end police defilement waved in the air, and chants of fortitude reverberated through the roads inside the court. The environment was tense. Garrett Thompson found a seat at the safeguard table, his demeanor pompous. Notwithstanding the heaviness of the proof against him, his legal counselor made each endeavor to dishonor the case, asserting that the allegations were misrepresented and the video proof inconsistent. Yet, Marcus was set he up introduced a convincing case, carefully spreading out current realities and uncovering the fundamental disappointments that had permitted Garrett to work without any potential repercussions for such a long time. The defining moment came when a shocked observer was called to the stand. It was the more youthful official who had been available during a significant number of Garrett's demonstrations of badgering against Jamal. At first reluctant to affirm, the official had been convinced by Marcus. What's more, the staggering public help for Jamal's goal. His declaration was an overwhelming disaster for Garrett's guard. He depicted exhaustively the dangers and intimidation he had seen, the distortion of proof and the culture of quietness inside the region. His words left most likely about Garrett's responsibility and the fundamental debasement that had empowered him. As the preliminary unfurled, Jamal felt a combination of justification and distress. While he was extraordinary full for reality at last become known, he proved unable help however ponder the endless other people who had experienced comparative treacheries without getting something very similar backing or consideration. He made plans to respect their battles by proceeding to battle for change. When the jury got back with their decision, the court fell quiet. Garrett Thompson was found liable on various charges including attack, provocation and distortion of proof. His conviction was a huge triumph for Jamal as well as for every individual who had mobilized behind him. The appointed authorities' harsh words during condemning highlighted the gravity of Garrett's activities and the requirement for fundamental change. Outside the town hall, the group emitted into cheers as fresh insight about the decision spread. Jamal ventured onto the steps of the town hall, his dad next to him, and the ocean of allies. Cameras glimmered and mouthpieces were pushed toward him. However, he talked straightforwardly to individuals who had remained by him through his difficulty. This battle was rarely pretty much me, Jamal said, his voice consistent notwithstanding the feelings taking steps to overpower him. About each individual has been quieted, each family destroyed by bad form, and each local area that has experienced under the heaviness of fundamental prejudice today is a triumph. Yet it's as it were the starting. We need to continue pushing, continue requesting change, and continue to battle until equity isn't the exemption, however the standard. The group thundered accordingly, their voices a strong demonstration of the strength of aggregate activity. For the first time in quite a while, Jamal felt a feeling of harmony. He realized the street ahead would be long and testing, yet he likewise realized he wasn't strolling it single-handedly. In the weeks that followed, the aftermath from the preliminary prompted huge changes inside the police division. A few officials surrendered or were ended, and new strategies were carried out to resolve issues of predisposition. What's more, responsibility. Jamal turned into a noticeable promoter for equity change, talking at occasions and working with associations devoted to making a more pleasant framework. His experience, however excruciating, turned into a wellspring of solidarity and reason as he remained on the stage at a meeting months after the fact, tending to a horde of thousands. Jamal pondered how far he had come, the kid who had once longed for turning into a legal counselor presently comprehended the genuine importance of equity. His process was not even close to finished. Be that as it may, he was prepared to confront whatever came next with his family and local area by his side. Jamal realized he had the ability to have an effect, and interestingly, in quite a while he felt confident about the future, and that is the way Jamal turned his torment into power, demonstrating that equity can win when we stand together. What do you contemplate his story? Let us in on in the remarks beneath. Remember to like this video, buy into the feed and hit the ringer symbol so you never miss an update. Thank you for observing.